Hi, this is Denise from Denise in Wonderland, a magical journey of faith through Christ. Today, we will sink deeper into God's Word and His truth. We have to chase the presence of God, and we can do so through His Word. Let's get started. Genesis chapter 30. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I will die." Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in God's place who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" She said, "Behold my maid Bilhah. Go into her, that she may bear on my knees, and I also may obtain children by her." She gave him Bilhah her servant as wife, and Jacob went into her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Rachel said, "God has judged me, and has also heard my voice, and has given me a son." Therefore called she his name Dan. Therefore called she his name Dan. Bilhah, Rachel's servant, conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Rachel said, "I have wrestled with my sister with mighty wrestlings and have prevailed." She named him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had finished bearing, she took Zilpah, her servant, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Zilpah, Leah's servant, bore Jacob a son. Leah said, "How fortunate!" She named him Gad. Zilpah, Leah's servant, bore Jacob a second son. Leah said, "Happy am I, for the daughters will call me happy." She named him Asher. Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." She said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." Jacob came from the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." He lay with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my hire because I gave my servant to my husband." She named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son to Jacob. Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good dowry. Now my husband will live with me because I have borne him six sons." She named him Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived, bore a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." She named him Joseph, saying, "May Yahweh add another son to me." When Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service with which I have served you." Laban said to him, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, stay here, for I have divined that Yahweh has blessed me for your sake." He said, "Appoint me your wages, and I will give it." He said to him, "You know how I have served you, and how your livestock have fared with me. For it was little which you had before I came, and it is increased to a multitude. Yahweh has blessed you wherever I turned. Now when will I provide for my own house also?" He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed your flock and keep it. I will pass through all your flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted one, and every black one among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. This will be my hire. So my righteousness will answer for me hereafter when you come concerning my hire that is before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the sheep that might be with me will be considered stolen." Laban said, "Behold, let it be according to your word." That day he removed the male goats that were streaked and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white in it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them into the hands of his sons. He set 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. Jacob took to himself rods of fresh poplar, almond, plane tree, peeled white streaks in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. He set the rods which he had peeled opposite the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink. They conceived when they came to drink. The flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks produced streaked, speckled, and spotted. Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the streaked and all the black in the flock of Laban. And he put his own droves apart and didn't put them into Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock conceived, Jacob laid the rods in front of the eyes of the flock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flock were feeble, he didn't put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. The man increased exceedingly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. All right, as promised, Genesis 30 is getting we got a little conflict between the sisters, as well as between Jacob and his father-in-law. So we start off, we have poor Rachel. Remember, Rachel is the one that Jacob actually wanted to marry. He wanted to marry her, but he was deceived by his now father-in-law, and the father-in-law actually gave him Leah, who was the eldest, but he really didn't want her, but he was already married to her. But he wanted Rachel so badly that he was not just going to stick with the one wife because he didn't want her. So he worked longer. So basically, Jacob is required to work for his father-in-law 14 years. And so so this time is about to come, that 14 years is about to elapse here. So, but let's go ahead and get started in verse 1 of chapter 30. So Rachel, she's envious of her sister because Leah, even though she's not getting the love that she wants, even though she's not getting the children that she wants, she's still getting love from Jacob, but that love still is also not enough for the children she's not getting. So she's upset. And so we have this issue. We have Leah wants love and Rachel wants children. And so we have a competition between the sisters because it just seems like there's always someone else has something that you want. And in this case, two wives of the same man. Both of them possess something the other does not have. And so she actually Rachel approaches Jacob, and she's like, give me children or I'll die. And Jacob, he's angry at her. He's like, look, I'm not in the business of making children possible. God is the one that opens and closes wombs. So if you've been unable to have kids, you need to basically take it up with God. And he is right. God does open and close wombs. So if there is a fertility problem, then God is the one who should solve it. There are times that sometimes God will permit man to go ahead and do something, and then God blesses the efforts of man. But in this case, God is very clear that he is the one that's going to make it happen, because that is the reason why Leah has borne so many children, because she was unloved. And so God was merciful and gracious to Leah by providing her with children, because she is missing the love that really she is entitled to. She is the first wife. She should have been probably the only wife after the tricking event. So she deserves this. So regardless of us thinking this great love affair between Jacob and Rachel, at the end of the day, he was married to Leah first. And regardless of how it happened, she is entitled to having some kind of, to feel loved. And it's obvious that there's some kind of tension in the household. And for all you know, she could be known as the one like, oh, you weren't the real wife. So just imagine what it's like living in this household. But anyways, let's get back to Rachel. So Rachel, when it's interesting because Jacob says, take it up with God. If your womb is closed, Jacob is the one, I mean, not Jacob, God is the one that deals with this. But instead of her praying to God in that moment, she says, here, again, she's going to do the man-made method. Take my servant. So this is similar to what happened with Hagar. And remember, in the ancient Near East, this was an acceptable way of getting kids. If you were barren, you could use a servant as a surrogate. And the child that was born, even though another woman bore it, that child would be, by all rights and purposes, that child would belong to you, even though your servant gave birth to it. This is a rule from the ancient Near East. This is a common practice. So Rachel is like, hey, well, and this explains why she's happy that the servant has this child. So the servant has a child, Bilhah, and then she says, God, in verse 6, after Bilhah has the child, Rachel says, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and has given me a son. So this tells you right now that she's assuming that this child, even though this child did not come from her body, she's saying, this is my child. And she's sort of thanking God for it, even though actually this is not a biological child. And again, she still had to go off. She had to, she used someone else to have this child. So not to say that having children by surrogate, so don't get mad at me. I'm not saying that people having children through surrogate is not a wonderful thing, but I'm just saying for the purposes of this, that Rachel will always have a hole in her heart. She wants to biologically conceive. And this child is not the child she's been waiting for. She wants a child that comes from her womb, but she is willing to accept this because she feels this is all she can get. And sometimes you can get very little when you're depending on yourself and not God to answer your prayers. Then we have also another child named Dan that Bilhah gives birth to. So there are two sons that she gives birth to. So it's Naphtali and Dan that Bilhah gives birth to. But then what happens is when Leah can no longer have children, where she has this spell of not being able to give birth, she is now, even though she's had kids, that's not enough either. Because again, that's what happens when you have a void that you're depending on man to fill. It just stays there. So she's like, oh, I got to have more kids. So what she does is she takes her servant, Zilpah, gives her to Jacob as a wife. And Zilpah gives birth. She gives birth to Gad, and I believe, yes, and Asher. And so we're seeing again this competition. Neither one is happy. And even remember, Rachel has had 2 children through her servant. You can tell she's still not happy, even though these children were born via surrogate. Because in verse 14, Reuben had found mandrakes in the field. And when Rachel found out, she told her sister, give me the mandrakes that your son found. Now, what's interesting about mandrakes, I did some studying because I'm like, what's so important about the mandrakes? It was believed that it related to fertility. Now, I'm not sure if it was just an aphrodisiac, but it was designed to help fertility along in some way, shape, or form. So again, obviously, Leah is not happy. I mean, not Leah, excuse me. Rachel is not happy. So she still wants to try to have a child. This is why she wants the mandrakes. It wasn't enough. Those 2 kids, she thought she was happy. She's not happy because she's still trying to have kids. And so, Leah feels offended because she's like, look, you already have the affection of the husband. And it's funny, she says my husband, and I wonder if she says my husband because she is the first wife, and and so she's like, you already have the love that basically she wants. She's like, now you want my son's mandrakes? And so she's like, really? And then Rachel responds, well, you can have Jacob for the night. And this is just a crazy episode. And so Leah approaches Jacob when he basically gets home from working, and she's like, hey, I bought a night with you with mandrakes. And it's an interesting and weird exchange between husband and wife. And this gives credence to the fact that, Leah keeps complaining, it makes you think that he does not give her attention that often and he doesn't see her that often. So I'm assuming that he actually lives with Rachel and she's in some she's in some house, like she's some second, 10th wife. And because it's interesting, it's almost like she's justifying why she needs to spend the night with him. And as you know, that should not be between a husband and wife. She should not have to justify wanting to spend an evening with him, but she has to give him also some evidence as to, I've bought a night with you, honey, so you got to come back with me. And this is really sad, even though I thought this whole event was crazy, but I realized how sad this was for Leah as well. I'm like, wow, it's like you've got to basically, you sold. So, I mean, this is what you guys have been brought to in this marriage. But what's interesting is Rachel goes through all this to get these mandrakes, and Leah gets a night with Jacob, and she gives birth. She conceives and gives birth, but Rachel does not. And this is important because God wants to make it clear that he is the one who opens wombs, not man. And now God does later bless Rebecca with the ability to give birth, to conceive and give birth. But it's interesting, he makes sure that she doesn't get that ability right after those mandrakes. And I think sometimes God will withhold things from us because he believes that we're in a space in our head where we believe that something we've done is going to work. And God's like, no. He will withhold things if he believes he can eventually intervene in your life and solicit praise from you. So he's going to wait. He's like, no, because then you'll think that those mandrakes worked. So I'm not going to bless that. And he made it very clear almost to Rachel Rachel as well, because Leah gave birth and remember, Leah said she had went barren for a little bit. So all of a sudden she's having children again. So this is showing the power of God and how God can intervene for the reasons that he has in order to bless someone. And you don't have to do anything fancy. You don't have to deceive. You don't have to do all these things. If God wants to do something, he can do it. He doesn't need our help. Now, sometimes God does want us to show faith, and sometimes we will have to do something physically to show that we trust him. But sometimes we don't have to do a thing. He just wants us to sit and obey and receive. And so we have this part here. So again, we've got children going back and forth. I mean, it's frankly, it really is ridiculous. But God, like I said, in verse 22, God does remember Rachel and he listens to her and he opens her womb, and then she gives birth to Joseph. Now, this marks a very important part because then we're going to shift to verse 25, where now Jacob will approach his father-in-law to try to leave. This is important because the reason why Jacob didn't do this sooner is he couldn't, because Rachel had not given birth. There's a risk when a woman has not given birth to a child that she could be demoted, that she can be put away as a wife. And so the only protection she really has, because she hasn't really given birth to biological children, is through her family. So Jacob makes sure he approaches his father-in-law. So his father-in-law can't go back and say, well, I don't know, I can't let you leave because Rachel hasn't given birth yet. And how do I know that you're gonna treat her right? So this is now the timing is great. So this is why Jacob tells Laban, hey, let me go, let me return to my country. Let me take my wife and kids. I've served you all this time. But then Laban, he's a little selfish because he says, if now I have found favor in your eyes, stay here, for I have divined that Yahweh has blessed me for your sake. So he's not saying, I want to keep you because I want to be near my kids. He's like, I want to keep you because whatever blessing God got going on with you, I'm reaping the benefits. So I need to keep you here. So he asks Jacob, just name your price so I can pay you. And Jacob says, well, let's see. In verse 31, he says, what shall I give you? And then Jacob says, you shall not give me anything. Because see, Jacob wants to make sure, as with his father and his grandfather, he wants to make sure that whatever he receives, no person can then come back and say, you are successful because of me. You're thriving because of me. So he actually wants very little. So what he asks for is, remember, he's been taking care of the goats as well as the sheep of Laban. So he tells Laban, because see, the goats are normally black and not speckled, and the sheep are normally white and not speckled. So he says, I want the white goats and the speckled goats, and I want the black sheep and the speckled sheep. And when he tells him that, he's like, listen, if you ever find in my possession anything that is not speckled and not the right color, then you can just you can consider it stolen, because these are the only ones that will belong to me. And so Laban agrees, but then Laban tries to be a little deceitful. So what Laban does is, right after they come to this agreement, Laban goes in and takes out all the speckled goats and sheep. He takes out the black sheep and he takes out the white goats, and he gives them to his sons so his sons can take off. And I believe it says they're like he keeps 3 days. He always makes sure that the sons travel with 3 days between the flocks that Jacob's watching, as well as the speckled the speckled animals that Laban's sons are watching. And this is so deceitful, because since Jacob is left with nothing, he actually has zero wages, because he is only stuck with white sheep, black goats, and none of them are speckled or spotted. So this isn't right. So he, in essence, has nothing. He has absolutely nothing. He starts on with nothing. But see, Jacob has a plan, and you have to remember that Jacob is blessed by God, and God is not going to let this go down this way. So what God does is God gives Jacob the ability to be able to create the speckled and the spotted and the sheep and goats of the right color from nothing. So what Jacob does is he takes these pieces of wood from a tree and he peels off the outer part, but not all of it, to kind of leave the white streaks. Because, if you peel off some of the bark, you'll see the white underneath. And then he puts these rods in front of the sheep and the goats. So remember, these are purely black goats. These are purely white sheep. And once the animals are looking at this streaked rod, as they begin to reproduce, they reproduce spotted and speckled sheep and goats, and they reproduce black sheep and white goats, the very animals that are supposed to belong to Jacob. And one of the things that Jacob does too is, anytime there's a strong animal, he makes sure that he always uses this method with the rod. So the thinking was that whatever the animals were looking at during breeding, that's what they would reproduce. And I don't know if that's true or not. But regardless, whatever Jacob did, God blessed this endeavor, because see, Laban was being very deceitful, and he tried his best to make sure that Jacob was left with nothing. And you have to remember, Jacob has worked very hard for 14 years. He has been an honest worker. He's done all that he needed to do for Laban, and then some. And Laban has been trying to take advantage of him, but God intervenes, and he makes sure that even though he's been stripped of everything, God makes sure that he still produces something from nothing. And this is an important thing for us to remember, that God does not need, you don't have to have a bunch of stuff. You don't have to have everything prepared. God needs nothing. All you need is God. And see, God will work with a remnant. God will work with very little. Think about us. We're so fragile. We're only frail people that come from the dust, but yet God is able to use us to make sure that his will is done on earth. And he does that because of his empowerment and because of the sacrifice done through his son, Jesus Christ. And so remember, you need very, very little to thrive with God. You actually don't have to own a thing, and God can do this very thing in your life. And one of the things I like about this story too, it's whatever the animals looked at, whatever they were focused on, that's what they reproduced. And this is important for us because even Jesus Christ talks a lot about our eyes. And he says, if you're going to sin with your eyes, cut them out. Because see, the eyes are very important. What are you looking at? That's why we're supposed to keep our eyes lifted to God. Because if we keep our eyes lifted to God, then we will always remember where our help comes from. And then we will better be able to handle the challenges that come at us in life. And we won't be so frustrated. As I was reading this now, I've never done this before, but I wanted to say here, look, don't buy lottery tickets. Stop investing in these cockamamie scams. You don't need a thing. If you need God to intervene, if you need God to show up in your life and produce something you've never seen before, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to scheme. You don't have to do any of those things. Jacob did absolutely nothing. He had 0 speckled and spotted sheep and goats. He had 0 black sheep. He had 0 white goats. And it didn't matter that someone else did it to him, because it was someone else that put him in that situation. It doesn't matter if someone else has put you in a pickle and left you with nothing. With God, he is all that you need. And you have to remember, if there are times in your life where you're like, I just feel like God has taken something from me, like he's closed the womb. There's some kind of barrenness in your life. It may not necessarily be about children. It could be about your health or whatever it is. You have to remember that sometimes God withholds things or lowers the hedge of protection, just like Job, in order to discipline us or shape us, or just flat out to demonstrate that he is our true Father on earth. Remember, as Jacob has said, I couldn't believe that God is in this place. God is in this place. You have a Father in heaven who is literally down here in this place with you through the Spirit, through his Spirit that he has placed inside of you. And so we have to remember that some of us, despite being saved and believing in Jesus Christ, some of us really don't conceive who God really is. And because we don't understand who he really is, we're unable to benefit from the relationship. It's like not knowing that your father, let's say your father is a Nobel Peace scientist and the best epidemiologist out there, and you have an illness. Not trying to do some kind of COVID relation, but let's say you've got some special illness. You know you have a father, but you don't really know that he's the best epidemiologist out there. So even though he's your father, you'll never go ask him for any help. You're sitting up there getting sick. You're probably not going to make it. And you have a father who can help you. All you got to do is just open your mouth and ask for help. So do you know who your father is? He's just not a name on print in the Bible or in an app. He's not just someone sitting in the sky with some clouds. He's not all those things that we see on TV. He is a father who literally is with you. He is with you, and he is willing to move heaven and earth for you. He did not spare the life of his son for you. So regardless of whether or not you're like, but God, I don't have nothing, that's fine. God will make it happen. God loves you. You are a son. You are a daughter of God. And even though you may look here and look there, but so-and-so has this, so-and-so has that. They don't even like God. They said they don't even believe there's any God out there. I don't understand. You have to remember, don't worry about those people. They're not, God is not their father. You have to remember, like Ishmael, I spoke about this before. Ishmael thrived, but Ishmael was not a son that lived with faith in Yahweh. He did not walk with God. But even though he didn't walk with God, he did thrive on earth. But you see, also with Isaac and Esau. Esau, he purposely made sure he didn't walk with God. He didn't want to do anything that his father wanted. And so we've got that son here, and then we've got Isaac. But Esau, he had kids, but then we've got Jacob, who the woman he loves is struggling. So you have to remember that God treats his children differently because he's got his eyes on us, and he wants us to understand who he is. He wants a real relationship with us. You know, when you have a real relationship with someone, you learn everything there is about them. See, there's that surface level, like if you're going on a date and it's the first date, it's very superficial. You're just asking things like, what color do you like? What's your favorite food? What's your job? What's your family like? You know, where were you born? You're asking surface stuff. But at some point, if there's going to be a deep abounding relationship, you have to move from that surface level of information to really knowing who this person is. Like when you are having a hard time, what does this person do? Does this person drop everything to spend time with you and comfort you and help you through this situation? Or does this person not do that? See, that's what happens. That's where a relationship is built. A relationship is built through these events of life when people are exposed for who they truly are, because who cares about surface information? And so that superficial relationships are not enough. God does not want a superficial relationship with you, because if he has a superficial relationship with you, he can only do superficial things for you. And I want you to really internalize that. If you only have a superficial relationship with God, you will never see anything supernatural happen in your life. You will not truly see the power of God in your life. You just can't, because you've got to enter into that deep relationship with God. Remember Job. Remember how Job was just so resistant and he didn't know who God was, even though he had been praying to him all that time, sacrificing on behalf of his kids. But when it got to a certain level, he was accusing God of being a horrible, horrible God. So he didn't really understand who God was. So he didn't know this until he lost everything. He didn't realize that he had a superficial understanding of God. And it was only after he had experienced for however long this suffering that he finally gained an understanding of who God was. And it was when he understood who God was and he made things right with God that God restored him tenfold. So that's part of the reason why I'm reading the Bible each and every day. And I know it's sometimes short and sweet, and the reason why I'm making it short and sweet is because if I really did the studying I like to do, looking at the Hebrew and looking at the scriptures that everything connects to, I mean, we'll be going for hours just on one chapter. But I still want to challenge you to still go deeper every week. But I want you to see through the Bible, to see these different stories and understand that we are in these stories. These people represent us. A lot of the things that are happening with these people, we've experienced in our very lives. And this Bible is not just some random book that's very, very old and it doesn't apply to us. And under no circumstances should you think, oh, the Old Testament is old, it doesn't apply to us. It all applies to us. This is life-giving. And the more we read this Bible, the more we will see there's so many times where we see such great moments where we just see, wow, where these people are showing that they're honorable, even though in the last chapter they were dishonorable or deceptive. And then we get to see God. And then as you read through this, and these people are a hot mess, especially Jacob's family. I mean, Jacob's family is a mess. But even though his family is a mess, God is great, isn't he? I mean, you have to admit, God is great, because the 12 tribes of Israel come from Jacob, and they include these children of these handmaids. So we see here how God he just blesses. And even though we don't deserve it, we haven't earned it, but when we read this, we can be encouraged too. Be encouraged that even though there will be times where you will fail, there will be some times where we just know we were dishonorable, we didn't do the right thing, but we can be confident that our God is in this place. And if all we've got to do is seek God in prayer. And as we seek him, he will forgive us. And he's still with us as long as you are with God, as long as you've accepted his son, Jesus Christ, as your savior. He will be with you always, even during the tough times. See, God, remember, even though Rachel did all that foolishness too, God was still with him. God was still with her, God was still with her. God was still with Leah. God was still with Jacob, even though Jacob has created this nonsense. Because Jacob, he's allowed all of this to continue. So I leave you with that. I ran a little long, but God, may God bless you. May he keep you, and may he show you that you are his son, you are his daughter, and he will never leave you. Bye.